Greetings, everyone. I am glad to be here, and I am glad that you are here. Today, we're going to actually be talking about balancing your deck, traditionally, and specifically with interaction and threats and things, right? One of the most regular mistakes folks make when they're building their decks, even relatively experienced deck builders, is they don't get the correct mix of interaction and what the deck is actually trying to accomplish. We've discussed in the past that the most important rule of deck building is know what you're trying to accomplish. And then every card that you put in the deck needs to be advancing you towards that goal one way or another. So even if this card is really cool, maybe it doesn't belong in this deck. You can build a different deck. That's the wonderful thing about Magic. You can build as many decks as you please, right? So in that same way, sometimes what your deck needs is maybe maybe a counter spell or two. Ooh, in my jank, yeah, well, sometimes. Maybe something to interact with the opponent's creatures, things like that, right? So that you can accomplish your goal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take us over to the Magic the Gathering Goldfish page and just look at the top 3 decks in Standard right now and discuss why those decks are good. And then we can take these precepts and apply them to deck building so that even if you're trying to craft your own silly jank that you just play, not even on the ladders in the play queue or whatever, your deck can be a little more successful. So let's have a look, shall we? Over here, we can see that at the time of this recording, the top decks in the standard metagame are Gruul Adventures with 17% of the meta, Dimir Control with 17% of the meta, followed by Temur Ramp with 8.5%, and then there's some other decks going on down here as well. But let's just hop in and have a look at the Gruul Adventures deck. This is an example by Charles Bjorklund. And thank you very much, Charles Bjorklund, for having this deck on the website so we can have a look at it. You'll see, the first thing you might note is the number of each type of spells. That's a good place to start, right? And then figure out what those mean. So, right off the bat, we see 23 lands. That's on the lower side of average, but you'll also note there aren't very many expensive cards in the deck at all. Yes, these are technically expensive cards, but they get cheaper. Remember, you're not paying more than about 3 mana for Embercleave very often. And the Great Henge gets cheaper by at least 4, so it's with Questing Beast, and there are ways of even having it cheaper yet with the 4 Lovestruck Beasts and the 4 Khazad-dû Mammoths that can get +2/+2 whenever you make a land drop. These are both 5/5s that way. The Scavenging Ooze can get counters. The Brushfire Elemental can grow by +2/+2 for each land. So it can also be a 5/5 if you have a Fabled Passage, right? So there's lots of ways of actually making it a 4-drop as well. As a matter of fact, I would say it's probably more often a 4-drop when you're casting it than just about any other casting cost, right? So they can get away with a lower land count. The next thing you'll note, holy cow, folks, 29 creatures. That's a lot. That's a lot of creatures. Almost, in a 60-card deck, that's about 50%, right? You're one shy, but darn it, that's about 50%. So of these, though, you'll note there's some card advantage in the Edgewall Innkeepers. There is interaction, destroy artifacts with these Emberash Shieldbreakers, mainly for other Great Henges and things like that. But, make no mistake, they get there as well against things like Doom Foretold, just being able to blow up mana rocks and things like that. The Scavenging Ooze to interact with their graveyard. The Bonecrusher Giant also actually interaction as well as being a threat, right? And then there is a Primal Might, and there's some of these. But on the whole, and the only other interacting card here is the Ankron War, which does allow you to get rid of blockers, things like that. But you'll note there isn't that much interaction here, folks. Well, how can you build a deck and not interact with your opponent? Well, the general idea is this deck doesn't care what your opponent's doing. It's going to turn its creatures sideways. But you also note that their plan is get you dead early. If you want to put a bunch of 5 and 6 mana cards in your deck, chances are you are probably going to have to also add some interaction because your opponent can get you dead early as well, right? So in this case, this is going to be one of the fastest decks in the format. It is going to get you dead as quickly as possible with as little interaction as possible, even though it actually still does have, again, the 4 Bone Crushers and the Primal Mights and the Uncrowan War all as interaction. And then these interacting on a different plane, right? Okay, but let's take a look at the number 2 deck. Remember, over here, it's Dimir Control. This one is by Lovejance. Thank you for allowing us to have a look at it. You'll note, remember the first deck we looked at? It had 29 creatures. Holy crud. This one, though, ladies and gents, 15 creatures. Yeah, there is a companion as well, but just 15. You see, this game plan is much different. This is not trying to get you dead very quickly. This is trying to stretch the game out and make things happen in the long game. By killing you, probably even by milling with Ruined Crabs, or just the slow beatdowns of the smaller rogues, and then getting them back, right? Make no mistake, though, the plan here is interact until your opponent dies. Because their spells, instants and sorceries, make up a greater percentage of the deck than their creatures do. 2 Bloodchief's Thirst, 4 Drown on the Lock, 1 Essence Scatter, 2 Heartless Act, 3 Agadeem's Awakening, which are technically lands, but then they get back these creatures. 1 Didn't Say Please as a counter spell, 3 Low Mage's Domination to steal their threats, and then of 1 Mind to draw some cards, as well as Into the Story to draw additional cards on top of that. You see, very, very different strategies here. Lots and lots and lots of interaction, recognizing that the game's going to go longer. If your janky, silly homebrew deck is going to be trying to get to the late game, you're probably going to need to not maybe include that last cool combo piece. You might just need something along the lines of Heartless Act or Bloodchief's Thirst or something like that to really make sure that you actually make it to the end game alive. But, as with anything, there's always a caveat. What if you really, really want to cast your big threats and not just be content with casting a bunch of 2 and 3 mana stuff, right? Well, there is another option. You'll see right here at the end of the decks we're talking about is Temur Ramp. What does Ramp do? Well, it kind of flies in the face of what we're talking about. You don't always need interaction to make it to the late game. Sometimes you can bring the late game to you as quickly as possible. Well, how are you going to do that? In this case, look at this, folks. 4 creatures. 4 creatures. How do you win a game with just 4 creatures? Well, 4 Planeswalkers. Ugins. And what is it that they're trying to do? Well, really, it's all about this stuff right here. I'm sorry, right here. And they're also going to be able to land these other enchantments as well. Genesis Ultimatum lets them get a whole bunch of card advantage all at once, as long as you can get to the very difficult to cast 7 mana, very specific colors. So this deck is running things like Cultivate and Beanstalk Giant to advance your mana very, very quickly. But wait. Remember how I said it was flying in the face of the idea that you would need interaction? Only just so much, folks. Only just so much. You see, they're trying to get the late game to happen earlier by having Beanstalk Giants and Cultivates and things, ramping you up. But your opponent can still kill you. So this opponent, or this deck builder here, Ted Kalberg, is also playing with 4 Fire Prophecy, 2 Jwari Disruption, which are also lands, but it is a counterspell, 2 Negates, 2 Shatterskull Smashing, again, land, but interaction as well, 2 Mystical Dispute, 3 Neutralize. Ladies and gentlemen, this has almost as much control in it as the control deck did. It's just going over the top with finishers like Ugins and Shark Typhoons, Cure Best Sea God to steal their things, make giant creatures, stuff like that, right? But the idea is you are trying to get there. So, just because you're ramping does not exclude your need for interacting with your opponent most of the time. There are decks that can do it. Yes, it's possible. But keep in mind, that balance is very important. How are you going to win the game? What is my game plan? And then how do I reach that game plan, right? And sometimes you don't get everything you want. Sometimes you have to make compromises and whatnot, right? And knowing when to do that is what's going to really take your deck building to the next level. So let me know down in the comments below, maybe some of your own deck building travails, when you maybe have missed that, made a mistake on that balance there, or possibly just maybe some tips on cards that make that easy. One of the cards for me that really makes this a lot easier currently is Bone Crusher Giant. That card can be very strong. It's both interaction and it blocks, and it really slows the game down. I think the card is very, very strong, and worth considering in your next Jank brew. That said, I do appreciate everybody who watched. Come check me out on Twitch. I'd love to have you. But you folks have a wonderful day.